welcome. It's Chris from Christopher Hole Training, and welcome to this whiteboard where we're talking about Lordosis exercises. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm quickly just going to overview what Lordosis is, just to give us a foundation and something that I can relate to, and then I've got sort of 2/3 exercises or four exercises that I'm going to talk you through, but it's not necessarily the exercises themselves. It's more how you do the exercises, and how you do them can be transferred into many other exercises. So there's going to be a few key points that I'm going to be talking about through this whiteboard, that you can start to maximize your or how you correct lordosis using exercise with these teaching points. So before I get into that, just want to quickly mention my social media. So you can come to Twitter, which is @ChristopherHole, Facebook, Christopher Hole Training, or Instagram, Christopher Hole. So please do come along there, like and follow. I'm sharing everything health and fitness on those platforms. Alternatively, come to Christopher Hole Training, and you can follow this link here. It's in the description below, and you could get started on a Lordosis program, which is a 12-week program, but also there are more courses involved in it on how you can maximize exercising and how you can maximize stretching to reduce your symptoms and even overcome lordosis. So please do come along to any of those. It'd be great to have you there and answer any questions that you may have. So coming back to today's topic, which is lordosis exercise. First of all, what is lordosis? Well, lordosis is an exaggerated curve of the lumbar spine, and you can see that on this diagram over here. So this first picture here shows the exaggerated curve, and this picture here shows the flattened curve. Now what you'll see here is a protruded belly here and relaxed gluteal muscles. So what we are talking about when we talk about exercise, we are talking about doing two things, which is tightening the abdominals and tightening the glute max. Now what that does is that assists in lengthening the tight muscles. So where we might use stretches to lengthen tight muscles, by activating the abdominals and the gluteal group, that also activates and lengthens those tight muscles. So what it's able to do, it's able to reposition the spine and the pelvis to hold the spine in that more normal sort of neutral curvature of the lumbar spine. So when we're talking about lordosis exercises, we want them to do two things, which is tighten the abdominals and tighten the glute max. And in turn, what that does, that repositions the spine and it repositions the pelvis to be able to hold that more neutral curve. So when we talk about the sort of 2/3/4 exercises in the next two slides, those are the things that we want to be focusing on. And also it's those two principles that we want to be using in everyday life. So what we'll do is we will talk now about the first two exercises. So first of all, what we want to be focusing on is the quadruped. Now the quadruped as an exercise, with regards to intensity, it's not meant to be challenging, but what it's meant to do is it's meant to help you tighten your abdominal wall. So you just go onto all fours, knees at hip width apart, hands at shoulder width apart, and all you're basically looking to do is tighten the abdominal wall and reposition the spine. So trying to take out that exaggerated curvature and try and flatten the spine ever so slightly. Not round it, but just flatten it to create that sort of natural S-curve, or neutral S-curve, as some people like to call it. And that's all it's there for. So it's not about intensity, it's not about load, it's not about fatigue, it's just about finding and recognizing and feeling that position of the spine. What we would then come on to is then just as a progression, which is move on to a kneeling or a full plank if you can manage the position. Because what we want to be doing in the plank is also tightening the abdominals and repositioning the spine. Now because there is an added load there, what it's going to make, it's more challenging to position that spine, because you're going to want to try and hold the position rather than keeping the abdominals tight and repositioning the spine, which is the focus of the quadruped. So once we understand and recognize the position of the spine, we can then start adding load and adding some endurance and some strength to the muscles around the spine, so we can then start holding that position more naturally rather than having to make a big conscious effort. But using the quadruped first is a good precursor to then using the plank. So when we are talking about tightening the abdominal wall, these are two simple exercises that you can get started using, and then you can move on to other exercises that are in my 12-week program, and you can obviously find them if you come along and get involved in the program. But for now, these are a great starting point just to get used to positioning the spine and feeling tension through the abdominals and what you need to be doing to be able to maintain that position of the spine. What we then have is the shoulder bridge and the hip thrust. Now, again, these are two very similar exercises, and the idea of this one is more to do with the glute max. Now, with the shoulder bridge, obviously you can see my position here, so you can see that my upper back and shoulders are on the floor, my knees are at roughly 90 degrees, and my feet are flat on the floor, and I'm pushing my hips up, so I'm trying to create a straight line through my shoulders, hips, and knee. Now, as I lift my hips, that will tighten the glute max. Now, as you tighten the glute max, it will start to reposition. It will start to go from that more anterior tilted position into a more neutral position. What we then need to do alongside that and simultaneously with that is tighten the abdominal wall and reposition the spine. So we would start with our hips on the floor. So you can see my hips are lifted in this picture. Obviously, we would start with my hips on the floor and I would lift. Now, as I lift, I tighten my abdominals and I tighten my glutes. That repositions the spine and repositions the pelvis. Now, if you find that you're getting a lot of hamstring activity during this posture or this position or this exercise, it's then advisable to move to the hip thrust. Now, the hip thrust is just the upward and downward movement of the shoulder bridge, so you don't pause in between. You go up, you squeeze the glutes, you squeeze the abdominals, you make sure they're tight, reposition the spine and pelvis, and then lower back down to the floor. Because what you're then doing is you're not fatiguing the glute max, and then therefore reducing the activity of the hamstring. So you're keeping the hamstring activity to a minimum. So what you would do is you would use the shoulder bridge to reposition the spine and the pelvis. If you find you're getting too much hamstring activity, you just regress and go back to a hip thrust. But you do exactly the same thing. So throughout all these exercises and exercises for lordosis, the main thing that we're focusing on is the repositioning of the spine and the repositioning of the pelvis, which is keeping the abdominals tight and the squeezing of the glute max, which will reposition then the pelvis. So it's about taking those principles and then using them in everyday life. So what we're not doing is we're not just taking 20 minutes out of our day to do these couple of exercises and then forgetting to do it for the rest of the day. It's about using these principles within formal exercise, so we are training our brain to go out into everyday life and be able to reposition that more naturally. Because lordosis isn't necessarily going to happen with 20 minutes of exercise or an hour of exercise a day. It's going to be happening in the other 23 hours or 23 and a half hours that we're moving around, sitting down, going shopping, driving the car, walking around, so on and so forth. So what we've got to be focusing on is learning the position of the spine and of the pelvis. Obviously, if you mix these with stretching, it's going to have a much greater effect. But for now, these lordosis exercises or the principles are key to overcoming or reducing your symptoms of lordosis. So hopefully that's made a little bit more sense. Hopefully it's given you some thoughts and some ideas to now go out and start actioning them and putting them in place during your exercise and during everyday life. But the main thing to remember, reposition the spine, reposition the pelvis by tightening the abdominal wall and the glute max. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris. I will speak to you in the next whiteboard.